So I came back to Mount Allison University, where I'm a third-year student, after Christmas. And I was at my desk, and I was doing all the things that you do after Christmas. So I was getting out my new calendar and clearing out email and regretting eating everything over the holidays. And I got a text message from a family friend who's just learned how to text, which is a big deal for him. And he said, "It was so nice to see you over the holiday. I hope you have a great rest of your term. P.S. Don't go check the cover of Maclean's." So, I drop everything and go check the cover of Maclean's because I'm super obedient. And this is what was waiting for me. The new underclass: why so many smart, educated, ambitious young people have no future. Now, I have next to no money in my bank account because of Christmas. My winter tuition is due and I pay high tuition. I just dropped $300 at the bookstore and I didn't even get to buy all of my books because they're not in yet. Also, I have 5 syllabi sitting like that, full of things that I'm pretty sure I can't handle in the next 4 months. So this was really not on the list of things that I needed that particular morning. Nothing against Maclean's, I know that this stuff sells, but it's really frustrating as an undergraduate student to be greeted with this in early January. But to be an undergraduate student today is really about dealing with an onslaught of negative statements about the relative uselessness of your degree. It's not marketable anymore, everybody has one, you're not going to go anywhere, you're just one in a very big pool of people who've accomplished exactly what you're pursuing right now. So I have a bunch of headlines from the Globe and Mail to illustrate this for you. It's not just the Globe and Mail that reports in this way, but I tend to read them, and when I knew I was going to be giving this talk, I started to flag everything I saw. So, graduate students need preparation for real life. University's hard. We're not elites anymore. A+ students are regretting their grades. Now that's funny because the guy that wrote this is sitting on a huge scholarship at Queen's, so it's pretty convenient to regret your A+s when you have several $1,000s because of it. But nonetheless, he's upset. Are we coping? Not so much, I would say. I don't know. And occasionally get a shot in the dark like this, there's no lost generation, it's going to be okay. And last week, actually, Forbes reported something similar. So every once in a while, you can take a deep breath and feel secure in yourself and in your pursuits. But generally speaking, it's a pretty negative situation. So the Globe and Mail, because I'm obsessed with them, they do this series called Our Time to Lead, and they pick a topic and they go really in depth on it, and they do a bunch of infographics, and it's really cool, and there's live debates and discussions. I did not make this graph because I have 0 transferable skills, so I just did a little print screen copy thing, and that's what we have here. I believe someone named Chris Manza did it, so just so we're all clear on that. I do know how to cite people. Yeah. It's good. So what I really like about this infographic, besides the fact that there's color, is that you can very clearly see that when people were asked if their undergraduate degrees were critical to their success, the vast majority said yes. So the data aggregates really nicely against that particular side. So people think it's really important. The other thing that you can see in this quadrant right down here is that when people are asked if it needs to be reformed, if undergraduate degrees need a little bit of shaking up, the vast majority of people are also saying yes. Now, there's this quote here that I really, really like. You could click each of the specific dots and see what people had said, so I spent 2 hours procrastinating doing that. And I found this one, and this female says, "I want my degree to be worth something more than an excuse for people to tell me that I need another degree." And I thought that captured really nicely part of what I want to talk about today, which I'm going to get to in a second. This is the rest of the graphics, just so you can see it more clearly. And there are the poll results, and Chris Manza's name. So this part of the Our Time to Lead section was ultimately depressing for me. It allowed you to scale by gender and by degree program or highest level of education what your average income was going to look like. So you can see here that my first mistake was not being born a man, because I would be doing a lot better out of high school if that had been the case. So item number 1. You can see the comparison in this instance between one of my majors, sociology. There was no option for Canadian studies, which is not a good sign, but I'm choosing to ignore it. So I am doing better. From a financial perspective, this is okay. Of course, the high school graduates that are male, I'm earning about $2,000 more than them, so keeping calm. And men in the same degree program are also making more. You'll sense a trend. I mean, it is, yes. And everyone's mistake is not being in pharmacy. So, whoops. Two major errors on my part. But the thing that gets me about all of this is really that it situates the value of an undergraduate degree in a very limited way. And it says that success after your undergraduate degree comes down to really two things. You know, are you going to get a job, or are you going to go on to get another degree? And you're stuck in that binary, and there's not a lot of room for movement. And it's pretty freaky to be at a place, you know, I'm a third-year student, I'm on the threshold of having to make a bunch of these decisions, to feel like you're stuck in this particular situation. So my talk today is really about how I took that frustration and started to apply it to my own experiences as a student. And the conclusion that I came to was that the way that I was thinking about my learning process and my undergraduate degree was a thought process that was very parallel to the ideas that get you to that place of thinking that undergraduate degrees are worthless. I was drinking the Kool-Aid, you know, as it were, and I wasn't fully believing that what I was doing was valuable. So I had 3 flips, or 180s, so moments when mentally I just completely resituated what was happening for me. And the first one started in high school, and the most recent one happened just a few weeks ago as I was talking to someone about what I was going to do here. But we'll start with the piece at high school first, I guess. 2 things that you should know up front about me. One is that I come from a family of academics. So I'm 4th generation university educated. My great-grandparents graduated from the University of Toronto. Great-grandma's degree was in like the equivalent of home ec, but it was a big deal at that time to accomplish that. One time I made a joke about maybe I wouldn't go to university, and my parents were like, "You have choices in your life, but that's not one of them." So excellent, good. The other thing that you should know about me, in case you haven't sensed it already, is that I'm horrifically type A. I'm a driver. I like to find solutions to things. My perfect world is one in which every gray area and problem can be nicely delineated into a bento box and alphabetized and labeled and put on a shelf. I have like this great mental image of a long room. That's all, you know, you could just go find the solution that you need. And that's largely because I was taught that education and information are your weapons against anything unsavory in this world, and that if you learn enough about it, you can solve the problem. And more generally and culturally, I was brought up on this message about the fact that as an individual, and particularly one that was born into a privileged bracket of society, I have the ability to change things, and also I have a responsibility to change things. So as you can tell, this isn't going to go so well for me, but we'll go for it anyway. So this man is Omar al-Bashir, and for those who don't know, he's the president of Sudan. And I only had to kind of address anything even remote about him because I was the captain of the debate team for 3 years, which makes me very fun. And we were prepping a case in advance. We were going to McGill for a tournament, and the resolution was something to the effect of this House would indict Omar al-Bashir, because even if he hasn't been directly involved in facilitating a lot of the genocidal acts that are happening in Darfur, he definitely hasn't worked very hard to stop them. And there's a lot of accusations floating around about the fact that he is a really awful guy, basically, in effect, and that the international community should take a stance. You know, when things like this are happening, it's not okay. So being all of 17, I was quite certain that I knew everything. And so in prepping this case, you have to prepare both sides and be prepared to argue both sides. So usually it's kind of gray, and because you're on, you know, kind of 2 sides of preparation, you're like, okay, you know, it could go either way and the world is gray and that's fine. This time I was like, it is black and white. Like, this man needs to be indicted. The International Criminal Court needs to go and arrest him, and that is the only thing that we are going to do. And so I started prepping the case, and, you know, we had a really strong government side, but when we went to do the opposition, I came across a piece of information that was kind of unsettling, and it basically explained how if we were to indict him, if we were to arrest him, which would be difficult, but if we could do it, then all of his henchmen and people that kind of exist around him would make it such that any NGO or group providing aid to that region wouldn't be allowed to access the region anymore, and any kernel of good or fragment of good that was happening and traveling to Darfur would be stopped. And in that moment, I remember thinking, you know, like, we've got a great case now on both sides, but this is super annoying because I wanted this situation so desperately to be fixable in an easy way. And what that piece of information taught me was that it was inherently a gray, mucky situation, and that there wasn't a clear pro or con in it. And I sat on the train to McGill, and I just kept kind of mulling that over, and it was very difficult in the end to argue the side that I thought was going to be the easiest. We should arrest him, because all I could think about were the people in the refugee camps that didn't have access to basic human things like water or dignity, and how that was going to be a really horrific situation if we did sort of take this political stance. So that was the first time that I sort of, in a very self-conscious way, realized that it was important for me to have that process of questioning, and it was important for me to be forced to assess what I thought I knew, because had that not been the case, I would have gone right along thinking that I knew exactly what was up, and that I had every kind of solution already right up here, and clearly I did not. So that was the first flip. The second flip happened more recently. So as I said, I'm a student of Canadian studies and also sociology, so I talk a lot about inequality on a daily basis. And in a Canadian context, a lot of the time what that looks like is discussing Aboriginal existence in Canada. And so I've written a bunch of papers. I've sort of made it my bugaboo, as it were. I think it's a really important issue. It's obviously a very timely one. We're talking about things like Idle No More, which is very exciting. But I felt very certain of the fact that I wanted to look at Aboriginal education, because I believe that education is an important thing, and that it brings about positivity and good for people, particularly this population, who have been so wronged by educational systems in the first place. So I put in a proposal for a research grant, and my supervisor was great. She didn't look at it and say, "You're insane." She was like, "This is good, we'll get through it." So I was fortunate to receive the grant. And as a 20-year-old student who had had 2 years of formal university education, I was planning to look at charter applications so that Aboriginal communities could have a legal access point for lobbying for better educational services. So effectively, I was going to set a new legal precedent on a national level, and I wasn't even a student of law. So when I received the grant, and then I went to talk to the prof, and she goes, "Yeah, so we're going to do a literature review." I was like, okay, it's not like fixing the world as much as I wanted to do, but I'm going to take it. So I read a lot of books, and I spent my summer looking at Aboriginal education in Canada. And I was mapping everything. I'm a big mind mapper, so I was doing all this visual work and really enjoying it, even though it was a little bit lonely. And every time I picked up a new book, because there's that like fresh anticipation, you're like, oh, all these pages, there's going to be something great in there. Every time I picked up a book, I thought, this is going to be the one that starts to correlate all these bits and pieces of information. And finally, I'm going to start to have some clarity, because things are getting pretty complicated pretty quickly. And I can't keep grappling with that, because complicated doesn't really suit a bento box as nicely as I would like it to. So every book there was like that hope. And of course, I never obtained any clarity, because every time you read a new source, I'd listen to a suggestion or look at a suggestion that the author had about fixing one problem, and it would be causing 18 others. And there was nothing clear-cut about it, because everything was so interrelated. It was like this spider web of complexity all the time. So I sort of worked through it, and I wrote 3 summative papers about what I had done, one of which was just like literally 5 papers of more questions to ask later, to which the prof was like, "You can't do this, it's too much." And then I presented on the research, and I went to see a kind of an associate research supervisor, so not my main supervisor, but another one, when I was finished. And I sort of said to him, I'm struggling, because I was really waiting for the part where this was all going to become crystallized and evident, and there would be some pathways for me to follow and for other people to follow as we work some of this complexity out. I was like, I don't even feel like I can speak with any authority on the stuff that I've spent 4 intense months looking at, because it's so complicated. And he's like, "You're never going to get there," which, I'm like, what? And he's like, "No, you never want to get there, Kylie," he said, "because if you get to a place where you think you know everything, and if you get to a place where you can say, like, problem is X and solution is Y, and it's neat and tidy," he said, "you've shut yourself off to all the complexities and all the nuances which you need to consider, because they affect human lives." So basically, to think about my ability to fix Aboriginal education or any problem was really just a statement of my ignorance, because those things are far beyond a simple solution or answer. So the next flip happened more recently. I knew I was giving this talk, and I was reflecting, I guess, a lot about how I dislike processes of questioning sometimes, because if you start to question, you lead yourself down that murky path of complexity, and things are not clear, and they're not fixable. And, sometimes it can be fun if it's kind of done in a tidy way, at least from my perspective. But, yeah, slightly OCD, just gonna put it up there. I was chatting with my friend David, and David's a fourth-year student who's going to graduate in May, hopefully, with a science degree. And David was talking about his honors work and how his favorite part of writing lab reports is the part where you get to list all the questions and all the other things that you could look at. And he's like, oh, it's the best. And I, really? Are you sure? Is that really the best part of writing your lab report? And he's like, of course, because the prospect of having no more questions is horrifying. If we hit rock bottom on that, what else is there? And it was kind of deep, it was like a Thursday night, and I was like, this is a lot to take in. But he's right. And so then I was like, okay, well, I can kind of appreciate that when we're talking about something like science, because I understand that there's a big world out there and lots of really cool things to be looking at. But talk to me about something like poverty. And how do you sit in a class and just keep questioning in a satisfied way about poverty? Because it's really hard for me to sit in a social class and listen to stories about women who have to steal, and the age demographics that do that the most are sort of 25 to 35, and they're often single mothers who are trying to feed their families because welfare is insufficient as a means of income and provision. I said it's really hard to look at the gender disparity that I showed you in terms of income. I mean, anybody who thinks feminism isn't a thing can come talk to me after, and I will yell at you a little bit, and then you can change your mind. But, I mean, I'm like, this needs to be fixed 5 minutes ago. Seriously, I'm a little bit over all of this. And he's like, okay, that's fair. Yeah. And he's like, okay, so I guess that the way that I reason that out in my mind is that you don't want to accelerate too quickly on a solution here, because it's going to divorce you from all of the details that need to be considered. The reason why this is kind of glacial sometimes is because everybody's trying to think about so many complex variables at once. And I thought, okay, it doesn't have to be a race. And he was like, if you're going to be the tortoise or the hare in this situation, you want to be the tortoise, because the tortoise sees more, the tortoise talks to more people, the tortoise accomplishes more in the end on some level. So all of this was a lot for me to take in, but what I realized effectively was exactly reflected in this statement. This is an art installation by one of my favorite artists. His name is Robert Montgomery, and he does these great kind of poetic art installations that are very public. And this statement, all palaces are temporary palaces, is sort of a mantra that I repeat to myself, because I think of that perfect solution and that place of clarity and that place of knowing as a palace. And I'm having to accept that when you get there, it's a temporary state. And that when you're climbing a mountain of knowing, you reach a plateau when you think you know everything and that you've arrived, and you turn a corner just to see the second half of the mountain in front of you. And I've had to really accept that that process is inevitable, and that it's also okay, and that I'm not failing just because I don't get a perfect solution with a ribbon every time I write a paper exploring something, every time I walk out of a classroom, that I don't have to be personally responsible for fixing everything, that I can just be one contributor in a sea of voices who are all moving forward to that same goal. So when I think about leaving my undergraduate degree, without a clear outcome, without the guarantee of a high-paying job or even access to graduate work, I used to feel very panicked by that, in the same way that I felt panicked by the lack of a clear and tidy solution to all of these problems that I talked about. But I refer back to this quote by Madeleine L'Engle, who's my favorite children's author. And she says, "I do not think that I will ever reach a stage when I will say, 'This is what I believe,' finished. What I believe is alive and open to growth." So when I think about that solution as being a little bit messy, when I think about my future post-undergraduate life being a little bit messy, instead of thinking of it as a scary thing, I've started to realize that to have a defined outcome is static and really boring, and that to have something that could change and be organic and be livable and real is really exciting. And it's that promise that keeps propelling me through this academic pursuit. Thank you.